All right, what up? So, welcome, boys and ladies. Here I am going to share exactly how to get into medical school and how I got into medical school. This is going to share the complete journey of my day one from undergrad to when I got accepted in med school in my senior year. And so, right now, I am a board certified psychiatrist. So, without any further ado, let's get started. So, who am I? Well, like I said before, I got accepted into medical school. I started college in 2015 and I was accepted on February 11th. Sorry, I started college in 2011 and was accepted on February 11th, 2015. And so I went to the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where I did undergrad, and I got into two USMD schools. So University of Alabama at Birmingham, and then University of South Alabama College of Medicine in my first try without any gap years. So I also served on the interview committee in medical school when I was a fourth year resident or fourth year med student. So I interviewed applicants. I went through their applications, read their recommendation letters, saw their grades, saw everything. So I know how the process works from the other side. And I completed residency in June 2023. And so now I am a psychiatrist. And so why did I want to go into medical school? So this is a photo of the day that I was accepted into med school. So why did I want to do that? Well, there's selfish reasons and non-selfish reasons, right? So some of the non-selfish reasons are that I you get to connect with people who are at their most vulnerable, right? So like I can think of stories where, for example, like in my psych residency, I had a patient I was talking with her, and her kids were in the room and she was in the room, and the kids dragged the mom there because they felt like she was getting some dementia symptoms, and she was just getting more irritated, losing memory, that kind of thing, but the mom didn't want to agree with it. And I remember vividly, like I was going through the psych interview and I asked her about trauma, and this grandma just starts crying in the corner, like where she was sitting. And then I saw it and I was like, okay, like kids, like, let's leave the room. Let me just talk to grandma one on one. And so I'm talking to her and she goes, I've never told anyone this before, but when I was 20, some guy took me physically and pushed himself on me. And she never told anybody. If I'm looking back, I think it was her uncle. I don't remember who the guy was, but the point is that like she was like just burst into tears and said she's never told even her ex-husband. Her husband had died, but she never told her husband that. And like that's something that I was the first person in the world to hear that. So like you can't really place that. Like there's no value to that. It makes you feel very fortunate. But flipping more logically at it, right? It's also a career where you have a high value skill set, like being medicine, practicing the skill of medicine, in my case psychiatry. That's something that very very few people do compared to the average population, right? So it makes us always in demand. And so that's where money and prestige also come in, because it's not the greatest paying job in the world, but like you'll never go hungry being a doctor. And there's certain level of prestige to being a doctor too. It's certainly not as much as it used to be back in the day, right? Like people care more about athletes and YouTubers and like other shit like that, celebrities. But like there's always a certain level of respect that comes with it. You can, if you're to your girl's father to get married and ask for her hand in marriage, he'll never refuse you because you are a doctor. Like, let's put it at that. And you also get to help people feel better, right? Which makes you feel better. Like I talked about that, connecting with people at the most vulnerable. I mean, for me feel better, but even just physically, they get to a better quality of life. And then the more you help other people, the better you feel. And so I knew that was the case. And yeah, I was good at science too, and I wanted something that where I could channel that skill at science into like all of these. So if you're listening to this, is this you? Like, are you a college student or parent? Are you looking how you can get into med school? Are you someone pressured by your family to go? Like a lot of brown kids are, Asian kids. Like I'm not judging just is this could be you. You might be someone who's good at science like me and now wondering like where can you channel that. You want a high income stable job, right, as many young guys do. You want to impact people's lives more personally, have that personal, like you don't want to just be some Wall Street person looking at numbers. You want to make changes in people's lives. You might have your own medical expertises or experiences that have led you to this journey, or you may want to become a psychiatrist, like just like me. So all of these are perfectly valid reasons, and you could be one of these people. And no judgment if you are or not. And but if you are, you want to learn how to get into medical school, then keep on watching. So just to summarize, like just to go over the stats, like getting in is hard AF. Like it's not just like you just apply and you get in. Like many people apply multiple times and are rejected multiple times. And now these are practicing doctors like crushing it, but they've been rejected multiple times. Like one of the psych influencers, Goodman MD, he's on TikTok. I think he's got like a couple million followers, and he talks about how he was rejected 2 or 3 times from medical school. And now he's a big like medical school influencer, right? So it's pretty common. But like looking at the stats here, Harvard, these are the top schools, of course, but Harvard acceptance rate 3.3, GPA 3.95, median MCAT 520, right? So this is like top 1%, right? All of these 3%, 2%, 6%, 3%, 2%. So all like really low numbers of everyone who applies. And even for like state schools, like one I went to, I think acceptance is probably like 20%, if I had to guess, like of all applicants. It's Needless to say, it's a hard thing to do. So it's definitely an achievement, and you definitely have to prepare for it. And this is the point, right? So preparation starts day one. And this is very, very important. The more time you waste just like screwing around, especially when you're younger and like not taking the preparation seriously, if you delay a year, application cycle happens a year by year. So if you like mess up something that pushes your cycle back, then it's not just like the time that you're losing now, it's the year of attending income that you're giving up. So you're giving up 200, 300, 400K in the future that you could have been made if you got in 1 year earlier, right? So these are some salaries, right? So if you were a plastic surgeon, for example, you're giving up $619,000 because you chose to take a travel year, or you fucked around in undergrad and you got bad grades, so you have to go like get a master's or something, right? There's no judgment. Like you do what you do. Everyone makes their own choices, but like understand that that is what you are sacrificing. So for me in psychiatry, I would have been sacrificing around 300. So here is what you need to get into medical school. Like these are the things that the committee looks for. So look for GPA, your major, volunteering, leadership, research, medical experience and shadowing, and unique attributes. And so we'll get into all of these, but it's important to know these so you can prepare your application. So GPA. So this is GPA. This is my entire transcript from college. So just to summarize, right? I overall had a 3.78 GPA finishing with. So, my first semesters I got 3.8, 3.77. So this was freshman year. Summer I did just one class. Sophomore year, I got 3.92, 3.94. So really like stepped it up a little bit from here to here. And then my junior year, I got 3.58 here, and then a 4.0 GPA here. So you can see roughly I'm in the 3.5 to 4 GPA range, right? And then fall semester again here, I got a 4.0, and then here I got a 3.0, but we don't need to go into that. But anyway, so the point being is you do need a high GPA. This was my GPA 3.78, and yeah, that's what allowed me to get in. So your major doesn't matter. Like there's many different choices you can take. So I was a biology major with a chemistry minor. Like that's just what I did, but it doesn't really fucking matter. The more important question is that these are some considerations for your major, right? So how hard is your major? This matters. This is important because the harder it is, the harder to get a good GPA, and your GPAs are weighted equivalently. Like there's no difference between a biomedical engineering GPA versus a communications major GPA in the eyes of the admissions committee. Like if you get like a 3.4 as a BME, like I would rather take a 3.9 as a communications major if I was applying. Like your 3.4 might even get filtered out. if like the school has a cutoff. So that's important to note. Second thing is that can you talk passionately about your major, right? Like people, when in the admissions committee, we always want people who are into what they want to do and like they pursue their interests. So imagine if I have a kid who's interviewing and he says, hey, like I just chose, to major in history because my dad made me. Like, is that the person you want to be your doctor who chose to go into medicine because their father made him also? Versus, hey, I chose to go into history because like I loved studying history as a kid. I used to read all these like history novels and that got me interested in, I read the Dan Brown novels and I got super into all this architecture and I played Assassin's Creed and I thought like those games were sick. And so that made me want to study history because like I want to be able to not repeat the same mistakes from that past. Like, and so now I went into because I want to learn about the history of medicine and how we can stop the barbaric stuff we did in the past and not repeat those same mistakes. Like, you see, like that's fucking interesting. Oh, like that's cool. And third point there, can you relate it to medicine, right? Like just like the history example. Like for example, we had a girl in my class who was a art major. Like she would just do like hand drawings and stuff. And so like she crushed it in medical school. Like she used to make all these like medical illustrations when she studied. And like, if you had a bunch of antibiotics you had to memorize, she'd make some kind of like diagram. If you had to measure like a disease, like she'd measure exactly like how the disease flow happened, all the little molecules that like came in. And, if we had to memorize the immune cell markers, everyone was like a different kind of creature. And of course, like anatomy was like crushed it, right? Point being that like she was able to chart her art stuff into related to medicine. And then the last question is it you in the future? Like, if you don't go into medicine, if you try to pivot from medicine, right, is your major actually going to be useful? For example, so now if I go back, like I probably would have majored in something like business related. So one, I could have a more chill college experience. Of course, that's my selfish reason. But second is that like everything I learned from business, I learned on my own. So imagine if I had learned it on like through school, right? And like networking, I could have networked too. Then I would have saved the time I had to learn business later on. And so now we get to prereq classes. And so this is important. So whatever major you are in, you have to have a certain number of prereqs to be able to apply for the school. So for example, the school I went to, South Alabama, right? They wanted biology, they wanted English, math, humanities course, organic, basically general chemistry, organic chemistry, physics, and like they wanted all of those classes, right? And so like if you I was a major, so I had to take all those anyway. But if I was a business major, then I would have had to selectively choose all these classes. So it's important to note that. So the next thing is volunteering. And like volunteering is crucial. You have to volunteer to get into medical school. And so the volunteering that I did was that I did Habitat for Humanity, right? So it's from 7 a.m. till 12 p.m., basically one Saturday a month. I would go and like volunteer with Habitat and like help build houses for them. Basically, like we would meet all in this park, all of us at volunteering, and then we would take either our cars or like a bus or something, and then we would go to the site where we'd meet all the Habitat team members. We'd meet maybe even like the house owners, and then like all the tools would be there for us. And like there'd be a house who would assign us all different tasks. So like you can see here, like I was building, I think I was painting these doors, but like I've done roofing stuff, like hammering and nails and like floorboards and painting, chainsawing, like a lot of different cool things that we got to do from it. And it also, there was a pretty good impact, right? Like we got to see the house get completed, going from like, semester to semester, from year to year. Got to experience gratitude from the family. Like I remember this family's face. It was like a Hispanic family of 4 or 5. And like we started like halfway through with their house. And like by the time that we finished the semester, because like other people would go on the houses too, like, other teams and stuff. And yeah, like, the family, they remember this dad who's like this short Hispanic guy, little heavyweight with like tears in his eyes. And he was crying, because like now they just got a house. So it's like, it's cool, right? There's teamwork that I learned from that. So, just collaborating with some of my classmates, like these are my fraternity brothers here. And, so it's like a little bonding thing for us. And I got to learn some hands on skills. Like I grew up in the suburbs. So I never had hands on experience. So this was nice to actually have that. And yeah, more importantly, it also demonstrated a long term commitment where like I didn't just volunteer here for like a day or two. Like this was something I did like every month, every semester, up until I got accepted into med school. So like it shows that level of commitment as well, which is nice. And I alluded a little bit on this, but so why do medical schools care? Like, why do they want volunteering? So, one, to prove that you're a caring person, right? Like, everyone wants doctors who are caring. They're not just like walking around textbooks, right? That bedside manner is discussed for a reason. They want to prove that you get satisfaction from helping others because medical school is a pretty hard career, right? Med school residency. And, there's a lot of bullshit, like a lot of notes you write. You might work 80-hour weeks. You have supervisors telling you dumb things that you might disagree with. You have to do all this admin work, like charting your hours and making sure that you do all these modules that the hospital HR department makes you do. And like you're getting paid a pittance, like 50K a year as a resident, when your worth is so much higher. So you have to find some kind of level of internal satisfaction to be able to deal with all that, right? And if you already had, so they'd rather select for people who are wired this way. So now, what volunteering you pick though? So that's the question. This is a secret that nobody will tell you. You always hear you have to go volunteer, but how do you know what's the right stuff? Because you have limited time. The key, excuse me, is that you have to do something that makes you look the best. That's a fact. With your volunteering, we want our volunteering to be something that demonstrates leadership, that shows long-term commitment, and has an impact. These are the three important things. Like, for example, like when I was in college, we had these like volunteer days. It was like MLK Day and like Labor Day volunteering and like end of school volunteering. It's like the Mondays or whatever. And like the school would kind of get together and like go on these like little volunteer trips. Like you would show up and like they would divide you out to different locations and you'd go volunteers. Like one year I went to some school and we picked up like leaves and like like basically we cleaned out their yard of like branches and stuff. And another year we like painted some mural in the city. Point being that like that is just like one off little thing, and that's not demonstrating leadership, commitment, or any measurable impact over time. Whereas like the habitat stuff is like a little bit more of that. And so anytime you volunteer, you benefit from it. Like that's the truth. That's the reality. And why do you think every billionaire, when they donate, they have a press conference? Yes, they're donating, they're helping people, but they're also benefiting very much on their own, right? Like that coverage that they get, it boosts their brand. Why does Mr. Beast have those videos donating 100K to fix people's eyesight and shit? Like, yeah, he's helping people, but don't get it twisted. Like, it's boosting his brand and his reputation, and he makes a lot more than that than what he gives, so that he can keep the channel going. And like, there's no hate to him for that. He understands. So this volunteering that really set me apart. So this was called the IGHSL, International Global Health Service Learning. And so basically I had joined up with this class, right? And it was a class on global health. And when I signed up for this class, they all gave us these different projects. And so the project that I got, these are my two roommates from college, actually. And the project that we got was that we partnered with a local homeless agency. It was called Roof. And basically what they wanted to do was they had a homeless people who needed homes, but they needed a way to sort out like who needs the homes the most, right? And then what they wanted was the housing first model, basically saying that instead of basically the people who need the homes the most should be like are the most medically sick ones. And so if we get them homes, then they're less likely to use medical services like the ER, and that way they save the community a bunch of costs. And so we use this thing called a vulnerability index. Basically, like it's like a tool that assesses how bad someone's health is, right? And so what we did was we looked at different ones that had been implemented in the community, like in the country, and then adapted that to our local population in Birmingham and seeing how that would help, and then gave them a test pilot. So we tested it out too on a local shelter, and then we gave them that index so that way they could like start running the next steps with it. And so we presented this project. This was like a year-long thing that we did. We presented this to our community as well as our school research day, and like a big research day project. And we actually got second place in our division for this project. So you can bet how much the admissions committee loved this. That's what I mean by impact, leadership, like all those traits that I had mentioned. Like having a thing like this made me look way better than someone who just like volunteered at some like toy drive or something. The next thing we get to is leadership. And so my big leadership was that I was the scholarship chairman of my fraternity. And so these are all my fraternity bros. Obviously, you see that it's me too, right? And so here, let me go back. So there's a story that I told to the admissions committee that they absolutely loved. Like they loved this leadership story. And so when I was a scholarship chairman, basically I was responsible for the grades of the chapter and making sure that we were in good standing and that we had the highest grades that we could, right? So I came up with this whole scholarship plan. And so like this is like the plan where basically we had a scholarship contract, right? We tracked everyone's hours. I had some rewards. I'll explain what the plan was in a second. But the point is that I had this the plan was that if you didn't follow the mandatory study hours, then you unfortunately you missed social events. And so like I was 20 at the time, and one of my bros, like my really close friends, is let me see if he's actually in this photo or not. He's actually not in this photo, but anyway, so one of my close fraternity friends, right? He didn't have the grade he needed, so he got put on the study plan, but he did not show up to his study hours. And so I had to tell him that he could not come to our formal that year because he had missed those study hours. And like formal is like our biggest like, party of the year where we rent out a nice venue. We might go to a destination like New Orleans or Tampa or Nashville or something, right? You invite a date with you and it's like a nice, like big party. Everyone dressed formal. Like it's a big college world. Anyway, so had to tell him that he couldn't go, and this is my really good friend. And I felt like it took a lot of courage to like. I was super scared it would affect our friendship, just like you remember in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone when Dumbledore awards Neville 5 points to Gryffindor because he stood up to Harry, Ron, and Hermione as they went to go find Fluffy, and like Hermione had to stun him. So point being that I had to tell him that, and then I had to stick with it. And so and then I had to deal with that guilt, like we're all there having fun, and then I told my buddy that he couldn't come. And even like halfway through, his girlfriend messaged me and she was like, "Hey, like please reconsider, like have him come, like blah blah blah." And but I just knew that I had to stand up straight to like refuse that. Admissions committee, they fucking love that story. Like I told them that, kind of relate to all my struggle, and they're like, "Wow, that's amazing," right? And it's not like the most like groundbreaking story. I wasn't like saving children from cancer or homelessness or from like like S or whatever, right? Like I was just like standing up to a bunch of drunk frat bros, right? And but the point is that it demonstrates leadership, right? You take initiative, you do the hard thing, and so that's what they really liked. And so what I also did was, after that, I explained the scholarship plan that I developed for my fraternity because my goal was to change the culture of the fraternity. I wanted to have studying be cool and fun and like something that we did together, not like something that you had to do. So I wanted to create that culture where like we wanted to work hard. And so, outing my boy Haas here, but it's fine. I love you, man. And but anyway, so you had to come up with every person who had it, they had a contract, right? Anyone who had the contract, basically they kind of went through everything, their semester problems, their current goals, and essentially they're kind of saying like, yes, I'm going to agree to follow this plan, right? And then, I tracked all the brothers who had study hours too, and then their name, and then like the times that they came in, the times that they checked out. I had proctors for each study hour, like the brothers who had above a 3.5, and to make sure that like there was supervised study going on, like this whole system. And so like, and then the people who did really well, I had sent letters to their parents, so that way, that person felt rewarded by their family for like doing so well, and it kind of reinforced their membership in the fraternity as well too. And the scholarship plan worked. So for example, these are the grades from like fall 2013 to spring 2014. I took over at the end of fall 2013. And so if we look at this is the initiates rank, this is the new member rank, and then this is our overall semester GPA. And so, for example, this is the initiates rank, and the basically that's the new members. And the new members, before we were fourth in the Greek hierarchy, and then the second semester I took over that we were third. And so the new members GPA went from to 3.18, so 0.16 increase there, right? If we look at the, or sorry, I had that backwards. This was for the initiate. This was for the brothers already in the chapter. These were for the new members, and the new members, we went place to first. Like, so our new boys were the highest out of all the new pledges, and so they went from 3.13 to 3.29. And we had 10 brothers in the fall and then 8 in the spring. And so here I think this was because the new members, since they're trying to impress us, their pledges, they were the most willing to adopt the study plan and really, really try hard, right? Like, the new culture is always easiest to put on the people who are newest there. So, there was a huge improvement there. And then our overall GPA, we went from a 3.05 to a 3.2. So we were still second. We were second before, and we still stayed second, but like our overall numbers actually went up too. So, the fact was that I was able to demonstrate this to the admissions committee, like show them the data. Like, I literally brought these charts in and I had them in my portfolio and I showed them to my admissions committee. That's fucking leadership, right? Like, that's what they respected. So it doesn't matter about what foundation you started or what president of a club you're on. Like, what matters, like, I wasn't like the president by any means. I was a scholarship chairman. I was part of the executive board, but I wasn't the highest up by any means. Yet I demonstrated impact. That was the important thing. And like, that's why, I believe that this was so helpful in me getting into medical school. So, and the reason they care about it is because leadership matters in the medical world. As the attending physician, you are in charge of the medical team. So like, here I was a fourth year med student. These were some of these two are third years, resident, 2 3rd years, chief resident. And so, point being, and then this was the attending. So this dude was in charge of the entire team. So you had to make sure that like we all ran smoothly, we all had good morale. He had to step in when he disagreed with us, but he also had to make sure that we had enough autonomy, that we were leading and we were learning too, right? And so not only are you the boss of the medical team, you're also the boss of all the collaborating staff too. Not the official boss, but they all look to your authority. So like nurses, social workers, med students, scrub techs in the OR, patients, of course, like patients look to the doctor's authority, and like they're the person that they are most interested in seeing when they come to the hospital. So it's important that you convey yourself with an air of leadership and confidence. Administration looks to you for leadership, right? If they're implementing hospital policies, they want to change things, then they're going to collaborate with the head doctors in the hospital to develop that. And the community looks to you as a leader, right? If there's an incident in the plane, then like, if you're a doctor, like, you're obligated to step up and help, right? You are the doctor, like you're the one who is supposed to be an expert in these things. So, it looks badly upon you if you don't do that. So this is why being a leader matters. Medical story. Oh, yeah. So these are some of the personal stories I experienced of like where I had to demonstrate leadership as a doctor. So for example, like when I was a first year resident, so I was doing a call at inpatient hospital where basically like I had to take care of the new patients who came in, and like I was the only doctor in the psych hospital, right? Because like I was the one on call, and like the patient had come in like a couple hours earlier, but like the team who was there during the day, they didn't put any orders, so the patient got delayed with getting their medications, and they missed an afternoon medication, then they got delayed with their lab results, you know like this stuff happens, especially when the patient comes in like later on in the day, right as the work team is leaving. So like I had no beef with them. This nurse was super upset about it, and so she's like bitching to me, and she's like, how could they like do that, and they're being so unfair, and they don't ever respect anybody, and like blah blah blah, they're so lazy, and she's like telling me this, and like shit talking colleagues and stuff, right? And like looking at me like, oh yeah, you interns and residents are terrible, like blah blah blah, like stuff like that. I knew, but like she can get as verbal and bad as she wants to, but I knew that I could not lose my cool, because if I go to her level, then I'm ultimately going to lose in that situation. I'm a first year resident. Like, I don't have that much power. And so this is why the leadership is important, because I knew that I had to be the leader in this situation. Like, ultimately, I had to be like, yeah, that happened. Now let's fix this problem. Like, I'll put in these orders and we'll make sure it gets done as fast as possible. So this is why this lady was like 50 years old, and like, she should have way more emotional control experience. She has way more life experience than I do, but I had to be the leader. But then similarly too, like, a leader responds to feedback. And I remember one time, like, I was also in my first year of residency. I had this med student with me, and I guess like what I must have been, like, looking back, I was very like picky about some things, like maybe like if notes weren't done right, or like sometimes I would ask people to do like a bunch of like tasks for like the patient, but I would give too many of them, or maybe I was a hard ass. Like, I don't remember exactly what it was, but the point being that, like, I was talking to one of them, like, we give each other feedback, students and residents, and so I was talking to one of the med students, and she told me that, like, yeah, like, well, I was working with you, and like, one day, like, I went home and I almost started crying, after you'd made me do that. Like, I felt like shit, like I couldn't like get all the tasks or whatever. And I was like, holy crap, like, I never realized that. And so I had to know that I took that feedback in and learn from it, not get defensive or overwhelmed, but learn from it, be humble enough to accept it, and then move on. Long story short, like, leadership is important and it matters. These are just to summarize some of the lessons that I learned in my journey, was that it's not your position that matters, but the impact that you cause, the change and the improvement that you have either in yourself or in whatever it is that you're trying to lead. And then the lessons that you have learned, how you will carry those forward as a physician. So this is a key tip not many people talk about, is that just as you go about your pre-med journey, like, remember these stories, cultivate them. Like, anytime like a story like that happens, like, remember it, because that's what you're going to tell the interview committee. You're not going to say, oh, I learned leadership and discipline and I learned how to change culture. No, you're going to say, yeah, I created a scholarship plan that helped me improve our chapter's GPA, and this is how I did it. I learned bravery versus, oh, I learned how to stand up. I stand up against my friend, just because I knew that was the right thing to do. So remember these stories, write them down as they happen, because these will be the gold, like the nuggets that you form your application around. And so the next part of the topic is research. So research is super important too. Medical schools are caring way, way more about research than they ever used to before. It's getting more competitive, so they need more and more things to split people up. So here's me going from a lowly chemistry lab student my freshman year to developing my own honors thesis, my own research thesis that I presented and got approved, and actually being published as part of a journal article with my lab as well. So, story short, research is important. The admissions committees do care about it, and it's something that you have to get done. So actually, let me share. So when I was a second year student, so a sophomore, I knew that I had to get involved in some kind of research. And my freshman year, I'd put it off, but like, I'm like, okay, now it's kind of time. And I was looking around for different labs. Like, nothing really struck me that, like, something that I wanted to join. And then I remember being in my genetics class, and the teacher announces that they were getting a new professor who worked with lizards. And I was like, ooh, like, that's kind of interesting. And so I hit up my teacher, so she gave me that person's name. So I met with the new person, and like, this guy had just moved into the campus, and so he had no lab, he had no research whatsoever. Like, he came from, like, I think halfway across the country somewhere, and so he asked me if I would join his lab, and I said, yeah, like, I'll join your lab. And so, like, literally helped this bro set up his entire like lizard lab here. I was doing, like, I want, like, we were studying lizards, and so like at one point we had like 100 different lizards, right? And I remember I would spend hours each week. We had these lizards and we feed them, and so we had we had this like lab that was in the back of the biology rooms, and literally each like room had like 50 lizards in it, and we had multiple rooms. So I would go around getting these like little tiny crickets and then dropping them into each of the lizard cages and then feeding them, as well as like cleaning off any of the poop that was left on the lizard cages and like the they had. So I was doing a lot of that stuff. and eventually got involved into some field research too, which was cool. And like we ended up going out on the field, and like we went to Florida, and like literally we would catch lizards, because like he would go every few months, and like he would catch lizards and like assess their characteristics, like okay, this one has this much length, this width, and then you would see like how that would change. Like each lizard was marked too with specific toe clippings, and so each they would see how the each characteristics changed, which ones survived, which ones did not survive. And we were tracking specific things from like mom to baby, like specific characteristics, to see how that played into it. It's more detailed, but like that's a general twist. And eventually I had my own project where I looked at how much density of of adults affected the growth of juveniles. So basically, if you had a bunch of lizards in a cage versus if you had like less lizards in a cage, how that impacted the growth of the juvenile. So I had a whole project and thesis on that. And then we also had a paper that the whole lab was publishing, but like that I was involved in. And I helped, like some of that research, like gathering the data and things to contribute to that paper. So they put my name on the paper. And when I was applying to med school, like the research committees, they loved it. Like they loved about this stuff because they're like, "Ooh, like that's interesting. It's a little more different than just like some random cellular molecular research. Like, oh, I found that this molecule has a protein on it, and this protein rotates. Like, okay, whatever. It might be helpful for a drug in like 50 years. Okay, great. This is boring. It's boring." And so it felt like it stood me out. But more importantly, it got me a publication, which is key, right? Like publication is like proof that, okay, you actually did something and not just like getting experience for no reason. So I think that's something to look out for too. And so I'll share that journey with my homie's research journey. So this is my homie in college. And so the story of this, like we used to go out for a lot of buffets. Like every week, every couple of weeks, we'd get together with we're all roommates freshman year, and so we get together and go out and have buffet together, right? And so he was pre-med, and like he was pre-med as well. And so this guy, he got this mentor, this research mentor, who was just like, imagine this like South Indian guy, shorter, super dark, and like had a mustache here, and like spoke terrible English, and like was really hard to understand. Not knocking on the guy, just describing him. But like that was his research mentor. So this man, like he was putting my boy Hafez to work. Like Hafez was working like these 40-hour weeks, like titrating stuff and things in his chemistry lab, waiting for reactions. And so after a while, like he stopped coming to our lunch buffets because like he just never had the time. He was slaving away unpaid in this lab, right? Just to be able to like get some research, get some experience in his lab, eventually get a letter of recommendation, get a publication. But then what ended up happening was that this mentor actually wrote his letter. It delayed him. So I think to finish up his project, he had to stay an extra year to like be able to graduate and stuff because like this project he was working was super involved. And then the second thing was that this bro was super late in getting his letter of recommendation in, and it actually delayed his application. So he got it delayed twice. So basically he got it pushed back 2 years, and he missed out on his attending salary just because he picked the wrong research mentor to do research with. Point being, choose the right person. It is very, very important. The downstream effects are crucial. So why do committees care about research? Like I had this thought, I was like, man, like I fucking hate research. Like, why do I have to do this? Now on the other side, like I understand why. I mentioned one, that they want to differentiate us from each other. Just added another thing. The second thing is that they want us to be able to appreciate scientific process. Developing medications, developing like research techniques, surgical techniques, like all of that stuff, like it takes a long time. And you have to repeat the scientific process: discovery, setting a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, reevaluating, publishing your data, scanning the literature, all of that stuff. Like it's a process. And the more when you understand that, you appreciate how important like the medications we have, the surgical techniques we have, all this, like how much effort it truly took to get there. And then also what it does is it medical literature better too. Like if I read a paper now, I understand what they did. And so I can take away some insight from it versus if I have no scientific knowledge of that process, it's hard to get that. The second reason for research is that they want to recruit people who are actually going to progress the field and further the field. Because as I mentioned, research, the scientific process, is how we get new drugs, new knowledge, new techniques, all of that stuff, right? New applications for dosages, new understanding how the dosages affect certain conditions, understanding what medications treat what conditions, right? All of that stuff. So that's how we grow the knowledge, is like people actually testing it out. Next, they want to recruit people to academic centers. So it's no secret that academic centers pay less than private practice for doctors. For example, as a psychiatrist, I might be able to make like 220, 250-ish and working at an academic center, whereas I can make like 400, 500 if I hustle hard in private practice or something, or industry, right? So there's no secret to that. So they want people who are like actually into the academic environment. So they almost want to indoctrinate you to it. So that's why they have you do research. So that way you want to kind of continue and do research and like in that environment. And the next is that, they want people who understand how evidence works, and they practice evidence-based medicine. For example, in psychiatry, if I that Prozac works better for depression than it does for, let's say, schizophrenia, and we know that because of research, right? And so like that would be practicing evidence-based medicine. Is that like I understand the research. A more nuanced example might be that like caffeine causes sleep at lower doses, but at higher doses it doesn't have that sleep benefit anymore. And like that's practicing evidence-based medicine. So from all of that, like these are the core lessons that I feel like we should take away from this. So one, we got to seek the right mentor for our research. Two, talk to the mentor's previous students. So like I never did this, but I got lucky. I had a new mentor, so he was very hands-on with me. But like, I told you my boy story, and I don't think he talked to the other students, so he would have found out how miserable it was. And I'm sure he'll tell you how miserable it is now if someone asked him. Three, of course, be interested in the research. Like if you have to do it, you might as well do something that you're actually into and enjoy. Four, get a publication out of this. So do research that like actually may benefit you in getting published. Like my boy, it took him way longer than it took me. I have some friends who might have done research for like 3 years and they never got a publication because the person was doing these like big long, like decade long projects. It's like are you not going to publish, so it ruins your chances of getting into med school. Or like it was like a project that ended up being complete shit and they just never got a publication. So try to filter for something that'll get you that. Five, you want to make sure that you get a good letter of recommendation from a research person. So ideally someone that you have a close relationship, like if it's a smaller lab or you're actually into the research, right? It's more likely to develop a closer bond with that person than if you're like just a drone as part of his like research army. Then you're probably not going to get that close relationship. And then six is, if you're going to have to do research, try to do it for either class credit or make sure that you're getting paid. Like if you're doing this unpaid, no credit, no benefit, anything, then you're literally just like wasting your time. So the next thing is shadowing and medical experience. So this, of course, is crucial. I'll explain why. I'll explain now. It's crucial because they want to see that you've actually put your toe in the field and like you understand being a doctor are. And like this I'll expand on. And so the shadowing that I did, the medical experience I had, mainly this primary care doctor. So his name is Dr. Record. And so I shadowed him at his clinic. It's called Christ Health Center. It's like an underserved primary health clinic. I did that for once a week for a semester, so about like 4 hours over the course of the semester, right? And so how the patients were, how he interacted with the patients, what kind of conditions the patients came in for, how the patients responded to him, how his treatment staff were, some of the healthcare inequalities and disparities, being in a poor area, all of that, like his mission as a doctor, stuff, right? So I learned from that, and I understood what the medical setting was like, and so I was able to talk about my experience doing that, and said, felt like I could definitely see myself in that environment. So, why do admissions committees care so much about shadowing and medical experience? So, one is that so it's not like Grey's Anatomy and Scrubs, right? I'm so say this time, right? Like those are dramatized and they're like 95% of the time, it's not going to feel like that. Just like the day-to-day grind. See all the bad stuff too, right? You see the admin, you see the burnout, you see the rude patients, you see the long hours, all of that crap. Because medical school has a lot of, and residency has a lot of crap with it, and so they want you to know what you're getting into, because medical school is expensive. A state school is like 30K a year. That's what I paid. Private schools are like 50. At the end of 4 years, you're going to be like 120K in debt, not counting living expenses, to like over like 500. And the worst thing to do would be join medical school and then quit sometime in your first year after you've already taken the loans, because then you're already like 30K in the hole, and now you have no guarantee of paying it back. So there's that, that screws you up. Second, dropouts, like being a dropout of medical school, it removes a doctor from the workforce. And like med schools aren't like, college where you can kind of just like join whenever. Like they do strict start dates. So therefore, am I more likely to be recruited if I say that I want to do family medicine, or if I want to be a big shot orthopedic surgeon at Johns Hopkins, right? Or like a big shot, neurosurgeon with a private practice only taking cash patients. It's because their mission is not that. So like they're more likely to pick me if I go with what their mission is. Why do family medicine instead of psychiatry? Similar reason. They wanted more family physicians in Alabama. That was their mission. And to be fair, I was thinking about family medicine at the time. Like I knew I didn't want to be a surgeon. Like I'm a very like chill, like clinic, like low stress kind of person. And so I just knew that. But yeah, that's why I followed the school mission statement. So the next lesson is that you want to start early. So why did I do sophomore year? Well, I did sophomore year because like that's when the opportunity came to me. I was taking that global learning class I was told you about, and this dude was he was a speaker in our classes. And so like I went to him after the class and asked him about shadowing, and so he said, "Yeah, come through." But more importantly, you want to do it early so that way if medicine's actually what you want to do, right? Like doing all this application stuff in like senior year, you find out, oh shit, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. As actually happened from one of my bros. Like this guy, he had a 4.0 GPA in college, was like anatomy lab TA, all of this stuff. He actually even got into medical school, interviewed, applied like the same time as me. And then the end of his senior year, he was just like, you know what? Like, I don't actually want to do this. I spent like complete opposite. But the point is that like imagine if you had that realization sooner, like in sophomore year instead of in senior year. So the next thing is that like you take opportunities when they present, right? So I told you when I got my opportunity, and so you're probably going to have opportunities. Like, just take them as soon as you find something like that. Like take it. Like if you see a speaker, you see some kind of pamphlet out to the hospital, like departments off some kind of shadowing thing, asking other students what they did, right? Networking, all this stuff. Like seek out the opportunities when they present themselves and take them. So that's important. The shadowing just won't fall in your lap. So now we get to the MCAT. So this boy. So this is the medical college admissions test, and it's the test that every pre-med student has to take in order to be considered for acceptance to medical school. And your grade matters. Like this is how they judge you. Judge what level of residency you're competitive for. For example, like back in like when I was applying, like dermatology, orthopedics, those are really competitive specialties. And so those scores, people were getting like 250s and 260s, which is like 90th plus percentile on that. And so if you got a score like 220, then you were not as competitive. Like you pretty much, it's a wash. Like you're not going to get it because every other applicant has that 250, 260. So you consider other specialties. Now it's pass or fail. But so basically you have to schools, like why do they care about this? It's because they don't want pre-med robots. Like they don't want textbooks. They want people, human beings who patients, other clinicians, their coworkers can relate to. Like remember, their admissions committees are recruiting their own coworkers. So they want people to connect with their classmates, their faculty, with patients, all of that. So that's where like your hobbies, your achievements, your interests, these things separate you from other people. And then the key this is the key here, like how great you are. You don't have to be some like star athlete. Like what matters is how passionately you can speak about the experience. For example, like one of the other, I was getting really into board games at this time, and so I put like board games on there, and one of my interviews was just like, oh, like I love playing board games with my grandchildren, but they always beat me in Monopoly. I never know what to do. And so I was like, "Oh, here, lady, like I got you." And so I literally discussed Monopoly strategy with her for like half of the interview. And I was like, "Yeah, like you want to get that second row because that's where the houses are worth the most. Like you only pay 100 for them. It's like cheap to invest, but they give out way more dividends than like all the later rows where you pay like 200, and it takes so much of startup to make money. Whereas that one, you can start making cash early, like the light blues and oranges, and then that way you can start getting revenue a lot quicker and start bankrupting your opponents quicker." And she was like, "Oh my god, that's amazing! Like I have to try that next time, right?" And that was at South Alabama, and you know, here we are now, right? So you have to be able to speak passionately about it, whatever it is, because if you're into it, then other people will be drawn to that energy and they'll be into it. And now we get to everything coming together. So this is called the AMCAS. This is the application. So American Medical College Application Service. And this is the official application where you put it all together and you put all your stuff in that application and submit it out. And so this opens, I believe it opens in June of each year. And so like you want to make sure that like for example, it opens, for example, for me, it opened in June of 2014 when I was transitioning from my junior year to my senior year. So you want to have all your ducks in a row ready before getting to that senior year, that application. So that means, your grades, your the person interested in it, right? Like imagine me writing, I watched some doctor work versus I attended like Christmas parties and other things that she had at her house. It was called this program. Essentially, it was like to help guide students towards research. What is special about these letters? Each one of them has additional relationships built with them other than just the class. So the evolution class I took, he was also my research mentor. The global health class that I took, I did that project with her. The honors program director, like she saw me like being a leader in the social community of our program and like showing up and building a relationship with her. That's way different than like going up to some professor that you took a class with, you barely spoke to, you just got an A, and then you're like, "Hey, bro, like, can you write me a letter to this thing, right?" So identify your letter writers early. Remember, like by your junior year, like especially at the end of it, like you should know who's going to be writing your letters, and you want to start developing relationships with them. So like read books on networking, social skills, relationship building, like How to Win Friends and Influence People, Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. Uh, I also like there's a negotiating book I really like. It's called Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Not on networking, I'd say, but on using empathy to understand other people and their motivations, right? So point being is that you want to start building those relationships with them. It's the one the funniest see. Like I saw this a lot in residency when I was a resident on my residency interview committee, interviewing applicants trying to get into psychiatry residency. Was that like let's say like a professor wrote a letter for them, they other applicants from that same school got the exact same letter from that professor, just with like the name swapped out. Like dear psych residency committee, Jonathan is a great candidate. Like she failed organic chemistry. So like I'm not saying that she's dumb, but like she wasn't known for getting like stellar high grades. And she got into Yale neurosurgery residency from University of South Alabama. So like that's a big pretty big fucking deal, right? And so I remember asking her, I was like, "What do you think made your application stand out?" And so she goes, "Yeah, I think it was my letters of recommendation. Remember, as you move up in the world, it's not what you know, it's who you know." Oh, then the last thing is like, after the professor writes a letter, just send them a thank you letter. Like send them a thank you, thank them for like, give them a nice little gift. Or like, I like hand wrote that I gave them to my professors. And yeah, if you have a relationship with them, they might even do like extra. For example, so when I was in my medical school applying for residency, my the attending who wrote me a letter, he really liked me. We had a good relationship, and he actually called the program that I ranked as number one and left a message for them, basically saying that like he really really recommended me to go there. So it's like this, they'll just do this like nice little things that you might not get. And so lastly, like there's a thing called the committee letter, which like some schools they'll basically summarize that all three letters of recommendation you got, put them into one, and then present that to the admissions committees. Some schools accept this, some schools don't. If your school does it, like it's not the end of the world. So if they do it, like our school did, UAB, so like you just get this committee letter, but if they don't, like no big deal. Now, personal statements. This is where I stood out in my opinion compared to everybody else. And like if you see this face, right? This was my passport photo. This is the face 21-year-old that got into medical school. So this face somehow conveyed enough trust in people to at least get me the interview. And I think it was because of the personal statement. So I spent months on this bitch. Like literally, I probably went to like 20 drafts and like edited and edited and edited. And so the personal statement, so that's the narrative that ties together your entire application. So ask yourself these things. What makes you a good doctor? What story do you want your interviewer to know? How have your experiences led you to this decision? It's like, it's basically like summarize your 3 years, your whole applicant story, and give me a narrative of why you would be a good doctor and a good candidate for this medical school. So I'll talk about my personal statement a little bit, and I'll leave all my application down in the description so you can download it completely free of charge and like review it. So basically, in my personal statement, I talked about how I realized that I wanted to be more social. Like I was a lot more introverted and not confident. And then as I started get more social out of my shell, I joined a fraternity, started making friends, I started helping my buddy with weight loss. I had this issue with my eyes where my eyes were always red. And like that made me not be social and confident because I always thought that people always thought that I was high. And then I ended up getting surgery. There was an optometrist who saw that, and like she pretty much changed my life because she realized why my eyes were so red when so many other ophthalmologists had just said that it was they said it actually was like dry eye because I had like actual eyelid deformity. And so she found that, so that made me more confident. So that made me want to go into medical school, and I want to help people with their confidence and be able to catch things for other people. That way, like that optometrist was able to do for me and like build close relationships with patients. So that was the kind of the gist of that, and like they really loved it. They loved like the personal aspect that I brought in. And so this is the next step. It's called secondary applications. So this happens after you submit everything else to the school, basically proving that you are serious. So like you put together this application, right? And you pay a fee, like each school will cost you like $100 or whatever to apply to them. You study your application. So the problem is that like these schools just get flooded with applications because like this one applicant, let's say I'm from Alabama, basically trying to prove that I'm serious about the school. So you start to get these around September-ish, and they're basically like more detailed essay questions on like why you want to go there, what makes you a good doctor, talk about our mission statement, how we comply with that, like just like random stuff like that. Like each school is its own thing, and you can look that up. But the thing is, it requires additional fees too. So it's essentially just testing. It's like another hoop to jump through. So now, now comes the interview. Like, this is when like everything comes together. So the interview, right? Imagine that 3.5 years that you've put into medical school, like it's all riding up to this. Because if you bomb your interview, then you're fucked. If you do okay on your interview, then you may get in, you may not. If you crush your interview, you'll probably get in, and you could even make up for a mediocre application with stellar interviews. So it's important, not everything, but it is important. So for my case, I applied to 11 schools. I ended up getting 3 interviews. So I was interviewed at William Beaumont, Oakland School of Medicine. This was in Michigan. My family had moved to Michigan at the time, so I applied for all the Michigan schools as well. University of Alabama at Birmingham, my school, and then University of South Alabama. So those interviews invites were given from August to February. In hindsight, like lesson from this, I would have called all the Michigan schools and asked them to consider my application. Like I never did that. I just assumed like, oh, they don't want me if they didn't give me an interview invite. But like they get so many invites that they don't. They probably missed it, to be honest, because I was flagged as an Alabama applicant. So if I was looking back now, like there's human beings at the other end. So I would ask them to at least consider my application. And so I did a lot of mock interviews beforehand. I practiced questions in front of a mirror. I printed out questions and practiced with my fraternity bros who I lived with, and basically just like gathered all the stories that I wanted to tell in my application, and like made sure I knew my reasons for wanting to apply to that school, to be a doctor, etc. And so I remember walking in, especially at like the University of South Alabama. I vividly remember this. Like I literally like we had been dismissed from breakfast. We're about to go to the first interview, and I literally like practiced my power pose in the bathroom, like the Wonder Man pose, just for like 5 minutes, and did that, and then came out right as the interviewer came out, wondering where I had gone. So I just felt a lot more calmer, a lot more confident after doing that. And so being in the interview, there's two types of interviewers you have to prepare for. So you have to know either the interviewers who have read your application and the interviewers who haven't. So some interviewers like to comb through your application. Basically, there's three tiers. Some interviewers comb through your application. They might ask you about like minuscule things, like tell me about that leadership struggle that you mentioned here in like your sophomore year, or they might ask you something else, right? Some of them will kind of just like glance over it in your application, just kind of get a gist, but not details. So that case, they might say, "Oh, so tell me about you said you were a fraternity chairman, scholarship chairman. Okay, like what was that like?" Instead of asking about like details. And some interviewers might just be like completely blank, not seeing it all. They might just say, "Oh, tell me about your college leadership experience." So there's three tiers. The questions they ask you, like sometimes they're application focused. Other times they might be like vague general questions like what do you think about the state of healthcare and big pharma? What do you think about doctors and working hours? What do you think about community service and medical school? Like stuff like that. But the important thing to remember is that you want to create rapport. Like you want, in my opinion, you want to really focus on that. Because what rapport does, especially early on, is it creates a halo effect. So like how like when you like somebody, like everything they do, you tend to view with like rosier eyes. Like you don't like notice their behavior if it's worse compared to others, and if somebody you don't like, you think everything that they do is really bad, right? For example, no, every mom thinks her kid is above average and thinks her kid is amazing and thinks her kid is super smart. Like I'm a child adolescent psychiatrist. I've never heard a mom say, "Oh yeah, like yeah, my kid was dumb." Like, oh, they always say, "Oh, my kid was like way above average. He's really smart, but like he just struggles with this." Point being is that they have a halo effect around their kid. Whereas the opposite, right, is if you're driving and somebody cuts you off, you say like, "Hey, asshole, like, what are you doing?" But like, you would never say that to yourself. If you cut someone off, you would say, "Oh, like I had to get to work early because I have a medical school to go to, so I need to cut them off." But you don't think that that person has a medical school interview to go to, so you have a negative like halo effect on them. So point being, establish that rapport. And then next is tell stories about what you've learned too. So like that's what I did. Like I'm trying to make sure that I was telling stories, and looking back, I would tell even more stories. And like I would tell stories about like all my experiences, because like that's how you become memorable. People don't remember the facts and stuff you tell them, but they remember the stories. Yeah. If you can find out what questions the school asks you, of course, even better. Like usually it is forbidden, like for previous applicants to, like let's say the interview season runs from September to December, the early applicants can't tell the later ones what's going to happen. But like the shit goes on, right? I personally did not know. Like I just never found out. But like, if I did, then I did. And I'm sure like people have posted questions online. And so just some general tips for interviewing. So this is one, you want to wear a suit and tie. Like this is not a casual thing. Usually with my school, and like that's what they looked for. So I had my primary care shadowing and stuff ready, right? So like, you want to tailor it to what the school is looking for. Like just like you do that with dating or with anything, right? You tailor your application to what the person's looking for to give you the best odds of success. And lastly, practice. Like these things take practice, and ultimately, the more comfortable you are, rate them. When I was in med school, so I never had this as an applicant, right? Because you never know what the interviewer is truly looking for. So now I have this, I can share this with y'all so that way it helps you, and I don't feel unethical about it. Like this kind of information is available online, and you should definitely know what you're being assessed on or graded on, right? Like it's like taking a paper, writing a paper without knowing like what you're being graded on. Like how do you know what to write for then? So here, at least our school looked for communication skills, leadership, and unique special skills, and then being able to handle academic stress. And so rate these out of 4, and then I gave like an overall rating here as well too. And you see this here, it says special consideration given to students from socioeconomic or ethnic group, geographic area that provides inadequate healthcare in Alabama, who are generally interested in serving an underserved patient population. They spelled it out right there. That's what they look for. So tailor your application to what the school you want looks for. And now, okay, so you've done everything, you've done your application, all your stuff, you're interviewed, everything is out there now, and now all you can do is that's all you can do. Now there's 3 outcomes that will come from this. Either you'll be rejected, you'll be waitlisted, or you'll get accepted. And so with rejection, I applied at 11 schools. I ended up interviewing at 3. So I overviewed it. The one I got rejected from was William Beaumont Oakland University. They were like a new private school. And so I was rejected from them, and they gave me some feedback. Like basically, they sent me an email saying, "Hey, we don't accept you, but if you want to get some feedback on your application, just call." So I stayed, and like they gave me some feedback, and you can also call them too, like on your own. So like, let's say you get rejected from a school, then you can call them and get that feedback on your own. So that way you know what to improve for, either for the next interview you have or for like the next year application cycle should you need to apply again. And so the next outcome is waitlisted. So I was not waitlisted, but like many of my friends were. And like there's no shame in that, right? And so the reason this happens is because all these applicants are applying for all these different schools. So one school, let's say you have Sally here who has a 4.0 GPA and is like a superstar applicant, is like a track leader or whatever, and all these schools want Sally, but Sally can only go into one school. So she might get like 5 acceptances and not decide until like April. So they might waitlist you until Sally decides she wants to go here, and then all these other 4 schools, they give their acceptance to someone else. So for example, like one of my bros in med school, he told me that he got accepted 2 weeks before school started. So waitlists tend to be handed out around like June-ish. And this guy literally got July 15th. It was like 2 weeks before med school was supposed to start, the class. And so he assumed he got rejected. He made alternate plans. Like he'd moved out of the city, and then he found out that, oh shit, like I just got accepted. Do I accept? Like, well, of course you accept. And so he had to change all of his life plans in 2 weeks, and then move down before school started. So overall, if you're accepted, you definitely don't want to lose hope. You do want to start preparing for post grad, and you can always reach out to the school to find out more information about when the waitlist will move. And then lastly, acceptance. Like this is what you want. So thing from the day that I was accepted it was February 11th, 2015. I was in school, I was in class at the time, and the school, like South Alabama, they emailed acceptances, or they mailed acceptances instead of emailed them, more old school. And so I knew some classmates of mine who had received their acceptance already that day, like their mail came. And I remember checking my mail around noon, and it hadn't come. And I was like, oh my God, like, where's my letter? Where's my letter? Where's my letter? And so I go to, I'm still in class and stuff. And so I come back later in the evening at like 5 p.m. after everyone else I knew who were supposed to get letters, because like we had all interviewed the previous week, had either like they had gotten their letters already. And so I was like, oh my God. And so I checked the mailbox, and that letter was there. So I was like, holy shit, like my letter is here. And so one of my roommates happened to be in at home time, and so I told him like, bro, like my letter, my medical school letter, and he's like, shit, dude, like you have to open it. And so I remember we're standing on the second floor of our house that we lived in. We're standing over this balcony area. It's like right next to his room, and so I'm opening this letter, and it says like dear candidate, it's like in this like verbiage, your candidacy for app, and pulls out a bottle of Papa vodka. Like this is like the shitty ass vodka that happened to be left over from one of our like fraternity parties that we had. I was living in our fraternity house. And so, we took a shot of that. And then I just remember like everything else just like was, all my worries and all that stress was gone right after that. So, a lot of I posted in our Facebook group, and got so many congratulations from people, right? I definitely went out that night. So a lot of my friends came, and so we all celebrated together, right? And like people were buying me drinks that night. And so I just remember being like a super, super, super good time. And then 2 days later, I accepted to UAB School of Medicine here up at USA Comp, but this was supposed to be UAB. And yeah, so at that time, I remember that night too. So they had emailed us. So they emailed us the acceptance. I remember posting on it on Facebook. I remember getting the most likes on that post out of like any post I'd ever done. I got like 200 plus likes on that. And like, full disclosure, it was something I've been looking forward to all of undergrad, was like making that post. And so I remember my fraternity bros being at home or like in our house. We're all playing Smash Bros together. And so like that was a super good night too. Like I remember really killing Smash that night. And so, after that, I kind of stopped caring about grades, and, I was just chilling a lot more, very minimalistic. I had 2 months left of the semester. And I remember, pass all your classes, your acceptance is secured. So I was like, okay, like, let's fucking go. And so, I enjoyed that semester. Right, like this was the night that I got accepted. So we're not celebrating. Uh, I went to that spring break. I went to New York City for the first time. And so this is at the Nintendo store. We went to Washington, D.C. So we were watching the basketball game. And yeah, having pizza, right? It took like literally a whole week for spring break. So we were doing, this was a night, this was my homie's birthday. So we all went out celebrating that night, right? Had a great ass fucking time, like lots of stories, made memories. I just hung out with my friends, celebrated, enjoyed, and I don't and like, funny story, I got a C in intro to psychology. That class, it's the only C I've ever gotten, and it was literally an online class too. So it is what it is. But I have no regrets about it. Like now, like I'm very happy of the time I spent with my friends and socializing, because I think it made me a better person overall. Made me very satisfied, and that way, when I ended college, I was like, okay, like this is complete. I've rewarded myself for everything, and now I'm ready for this next chapter in my life. And yeah, so graduated from college, then ended up going to medical school after that, and now I'm a psychiatrist now. So the rest is history. But so I hope this long ass guide helped you. This is exactly what I did to get into medical school. I don't think you'll never find a more comprehensive guide like this, like sharing all the nitty gritties, all the step by steps. I hope this helps you. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.